Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Laura Wills, and I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Relations. I want to mention that I am recording this webinar for those unable to join us at this time. That way they can watch it later. So again, this is our Dickinson Coffee Club. The Coffee Club is a series of casual conversations with retired faculty and administrators. So thank you for joining us. I'll ask you guys to mute yourself for now. I'll ask Ted a few questions of my own, and then I'll open it up for you to ask your own questions. So let's get started. I'd like to welcome Emeritus Professor of Religion, Ted Pulcini. Ted began teaching at Dickinson in 1995 and retired just last year in 2019. His teaching focused on biblical texts in their historical, social, and comparative contexts, as well as on relations among Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, both past and present. In addition to being a professor, he's also an Eastern Orthodox priest, and he served in communities in Ohio, California, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania. Welcome, Ted.
It's good to be here. It's good to be here.
So it's only been a year, and what a year it's been. But what have you been up to since retirement?
Well, the first thing, it's been quite a year. And if you had to pick a time to retire, I chose exactly the right time. Every morning I get up and I think, thank goodness I'm retired, because to be honest with you, I loved every minute of my teaching at the college, every minute of my working in the church. There's not a day that went by when I said, oh, I've got to get up and go to work. That never happened to me. I always liked going. But I have to tell you, I can't imagine distance teaching or remote pastoring. I just can't imagine that. So I look back on, really great days of both being at the college and at my parish. And I'm glad to be at a distance from both of them now. But what I've been doing since I retired from the college on June 30th, 2019. That was my last day. And from the parish in August of 2019. And then I began an excavation, and I don't mean an archaeological excavation in the Middle East. I mean, I had 3 offices to close, one at the college, and my students know that I practically lived in my office at the college, and one at the church, and then one at home. And I said, this will be good. I'll be able to weed through things, clean things out, discard things that I no longer have a use for. And what happened is, every stratum of each archaeological excavation in each of the offices gave me pause. It's like a wave of nostalgia hit me, and I had to work through that. So it took me a long time. I'm still working at it right now. And it makes you realize just how much, you accumulate over the years, and I'm not even a pack rat. But it's funny, every artifact that I found in that excavation and closing the offices brought up all these memories. And of course, the Dickinson memories are foremost among them, because it was my privilege to work with literally thousands of students over 24, 25 years. So that's what I've been spending my time doing. And thank goodness, I've had the time and the space to do it. COVID has all these negative and very tragic repercussions, but one thing it does give you is the time and space and the solitude to do things that otherwise I wouldn't be able to do. So,
yeah. So I mentioned you were at Dickinson from 95 to 2019. How did the college change during your time there?
Well, our reputation rose quickly. That's the big difference. When I first came in 95, we were a good liberal arts school, but our motto was, we're second tier and we try harder. But then we went through a change where the reputation rose nationally and internationally. So that was the biggest change, I think. And in a way, I look back at my first 5 years at Dickinson when we were still, sort of rising, but slowly with great nostalgia. It was there was a time at Dickinson where I knew every administrative officer at the school. I knew where their office was, and most of them, I knew what their phone number was. And then the college grew, the staff grew, the administration grew, the faculty grew. So I witnessed that period of growth, especially when President Durden came aboard. It was really a very pronounced growth. That's the biggest difference. And I'm glad we did better and our reputation rose. But there was a part of me that missed what Dickinson was like when I first arrived there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I hope that the same kind of spirit motivates everyone to, you know, pitch in and revive the place once this pandemic is passed. So I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. So you were there a long time on campus. Do you have any favorite memories of Dickinson, either impactful ones or funny ones?
Well, all of you know that for a faculty member, the most terrifying episode in their time at Dickinson is when they're tenure. And begin the tenure year, when you're up for review, they have an initial meeting, which is very important. And you meet with the dean and with the president and with the other members of the faculty undergoing review that year, and the members of FPC, the Faculty Personnel Committee, who are the judges of this whole process. And that first meeting, I'm sitting in my office, and this all-important meeting, I'm sitting there and I'm talking to the parent of one of my students and having a good old time just sitting there talking, and the phone rang. And it was Marie Baker, who was for 50 years, she was the secretary. She said, Ted, shouldn't you be somewhere else right now? And I said, what are you talking about? And then I looked at my calendar, and I was so engaged in this discussion that I sort of said goodbye without even shaking hands with the person, dashed out of my office and ran up there. And it was just the most harrowing event, because I said, well, this whole process is off to a very good start. You know, so like one of the memories that jumps to mind most vividly. The other was I ended up being on Faculty Personnel Committee later in my career, and we would have emergency meetings at certain points. It's sort of the most labor-intensive committee. And I remember getting a message from Marie Baker, from the dean, saying there's an emergency meeting today on the second floor of East College. Be there as soon as you can get there. All right. I said, oh, crap. And I have another meeting. And so I dashed up to where they said they were going to meet. I opened the door, and it was a surprise 50th birthday party. And I was genuinely shocked by the thing. So that's another memory that comes to mind very quickly.
Oh, that's so nice.
Yeah.
Is there anything over your years that you learned from your students?
Well, to be honest with you, I learned from my students every class I taught. I mean, I tended to learn a lot about teaching from my students, because I found that almost all my students were very interested in learning, and they appreciated a blending of structure and of creativity. So I always structured my classes, and then that brought out a lot of creativity in the students. I think one of the questions you have on your sheet is, what was one of your favorite courses? And one of my favorite courses was Dead Sea Scrolls, teaching Dead Sea Scrolls, because it was a second level course. A lot of the people had taken the introductory level courses, and this was a time to look at texts that were discovered only in the 1940s, unlike a lot of biblical texts that people have been overworking for millennia. So I found that my students came up with insights in that course, fresh insights, things that gave me pause, things I never would have seen. And of course, I took notes on everything they said that really impressed me. And of course, I will not use footnotes to give them credit when I claim those insights for my own. But I learned a lot from students who had learned the techniques and the discipline and the methods of doing textual analysis. And it's sort of like I was reaping the benefits of the earlier courses, and the students were extremely good at this, and they taught me a lot. So,
was that a class that was offered every semester, or just every couple of years?
Every couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite courses to teach, so I taught it my last year. When I was my last semester teaching, I told the department, whatever else you want me to teach, that is going to be one of the courses, because it was integrative. It drew together a lot of the stuff I did. Another course I love teaching, Zach, you'll remember this, was the Environment, Culture, and Values. And this was before the environment the environmental studies department had its own ethicist. And so between philosophy and religion, there was this humanities course that had to be taken by people in environmental studies and environmental science. And that was going out of my comfort zone. But I learned so much from the students in that course too, because they were all environmentalists and were trained in things that gave rise to me to very interesting questions. So I love, there was nothing about teaching I did not like, except
Oh.
I hated grading. And it's the one thing I don't miss at all. But that's the only thing. I loved every class. And I'm not exaggerating when I said,
Oh.
woke up in the morning saying, oh, hell, I have to go to school today. Never.
Oh. Well, in the little chat, both Anna Adich and Nikki Grubo love taking the Dead Sea Scrolls class too.
Oh, great. So you guys took that course. It was amazing.
Actually my first Professor Pulcini class that I took.
Was it really?
Mm-hmm.
Because you took a couple, I remember you took several others, or at least one other.
I took as many as I could. Let's be honest.
you were what? You were political science, weren't you?
I double majored. I was political science and religion.
Oh, okay, good. Because I do remember. That's another good thing that I really learned a lot from. In my time at Dickinson, at one point, believe it or not, we had 50 religion majors, but almost all of them were double majors, which is the way it's supposed to be. I mean, isn't that the ideal in liberal arts college, where you just don't put yourself in a little, niche, a little slot and remain there? You try to relate things. And so the majors were doing that in the classes. All of them brought another perspective in, virtually all of them. So yeah, it was in many ways a religion department in a liberal arts school. We don't teach theology. We're not about, doing what a seminary would do, but religion is, one of those things that brings together all these different methods. If you're an academic scholar of religion, you're part historian, part sociologist, part psychologist, part arts, part, all of these things come in. And when you have double majors, that cross-fertilization in the classes is all the more intense. It was a great experience. In fact, I wouldn't say this too loudly, and I wouldn't say it to my colleagues now, but there were times I felt guilty about getting paid for what I was doing.
Oh, that's so nice.
Yeah.
And with this pandemic, or maybe just in general, are there any good books you can recommend?
Well, I'll tell you one I'm ashamed to say I did not read sooner, but I was giving a set of lectures in California, and one of the people who were there said to me, there's a book you really should read, and that's Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind. This is a book that I think is brilliant, and it sort of illuminates so much of what's going on in the political and cultural mess that we're in right now in our country. In fact, I have it here. Yeah, here it is. The Righteous Mind, and the subtitle says it all. Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. And it's really, I think an insightful and incisive view about how to understand how good people can really have sometimes diametrically opposed opinions about things. And to boil it down to a couple sentences, and why I really appreciated the book, he says, the mistake that we all make in this culture, especially those of us who are academics and in an advanced and educated culture like our own American culture, is that we think ethical decisions should be made primarily rationally. And he says, the first impulse to arriving at an ethical stance is not rational. It's emotional, it's intuitive. And then the rational sort of substructure is added to support your emotional response. And so the problem with a lot of ethical dialogue or debate is that we don't take that initial emotional response seriously enough. And the second thing that really impressed me, and this really is I won't get on this soapbox, but I think, as a culture, we value individuality. That's good. But I don't think we should be, valuing hyper individuality as much as we do. And one of the points that Haidt makes is this: that it's not just an individual decision. When people arrive at an individual ethical stance, in most places in the world, it's also having a communal dimension to it. People feel a certain attachment to a community, to a group, a hive, he calls it, a hive of people that you belong to. And that also affects your ethical and emotional stance. And I think that that's another important corrective to the way we think about ourselves in this culture, which is pathologically individualistic. And that's a real problem, I think, that has to be overcome. Anyhow, it's a great book. And in many ways, I think he makes a couple of big points, but then it's like going after a fly with an elephant gun. I mean, the book is really, it's a large book, but those basic points are hammered at again and again. It's a very convincing argument.
Well, this is a small group, so rather than doing anything formal, like raise your hands, if you guys have questions for Professor Pulcini, please just ask away. We have lots of time this morning.
Yes.
So Professor, if I may.
Yeah, Jack.
So what's next? What do you plan to do with retirement? What do you want to do?
Well, I'm doing a lot of things. I'm giving a lot of lectures, mostly in church circles these days. And interestingly enough, it's focusing on ancient texts, not only biblical texts, but patristic texts. And a lot of the questions that people have are personal questions, psychological questions, emotional questions. And so what I'm finding out is these texts have to be taken out of the ether of the 1st century or the 5th century or the 8th century and brought into some kind of personal application in people's lives. There's a psychology there and there's a sociology there that I think people are curious about, because at our core, I think what we are is shoppers in this culture. We're always looking for a different perspective, about how to interpret our lives. And I think a lot of these texts offer some very, I think, corrective perspectives to what our contemporary view is. And in that, you want to bring a balanced view. A lot of people use these texts in very erratic and extremist ways. Those of you who took my courses know that that's not me. And I think the kind of tempering scholarship has to be brought to this. And that's what I try to do.
Sounds like a potential book in the making.
A lot of them. Yes, there are a couple. That's another thing I've been doing. Sorry, you're here somewhere. I see S. Smith. See, I don't have her picture yet here. But Zach, getting back to your question, there are a lot of publishing deadlines I kept putting off over the years.
Yeah.
I found it very hard to teach and to write at the same time. And that's what sabbaticals are for. And I did get quite a bit of writing done in sabbaticals, but now there are all these ones that have been, in the pipeline that I'm working on. I just had one article accepted by a journal, St. Vladimir's Theological Quarterly, it's gone through 3 revisions. I swear this article has gone through more revisions than the Constitution, but that's done. Also, I'm doing a lot of review work for the Journal of Contemporary Religion. I've become good friends with the editor there, and I'm glad that she gives me things to do. And I'm going to be working on a couple of books too. I'm waiting to see, a lot of times scholars give answers to questions that no one's asking. All right, especially if you're doing textual studies. So I'm going to wait till in my mind, real questions percolate. And then I'm going to do more of this applicational type writing and research, which because of my textual studies, the academic work, and the pastoral work sort of can come together in some interesting ways. Matt, you'll appreciate it that, cognitive behavioral therapy, as you well know better than I, is you're looking for a framework in which to interpret your life. And that's sometimes correcting that framework can help you to correct a lot of the problems that you're facing. Well, I think that the kind of work I'm interested in doing can provide that kind of maybe reframing of things that people will find useful. So there is an intersection there. But yeah, something has to come next. I think to myself, well, if I'm lucky, I'll have 20 years left. So I'm going to try to squeeze as much out of that as I can. You know, when they put me in the rich ground of, well, my burial plot is in Franklin County. When they put me in this rich soil of Franklin County, I want to make sure I've used everything I've had to the extreme. Now I'm just ready to rest. You know? So there are a number of projects I'm going to take on and do that. I'll tell you, a lot of time I've been spending responding to former student emails and former parishioner emails. You know what's weird? You know when I hear from former students the most? In late August and early September. No matter what they're doing or what stage of life they're in, somehow that time, August, they're thinking about school, and either they're done with school or they're still there, but they remember things and then they get in touch. So I find that, I always say when I hear the cicadas singing in the trees, I know it's time to start getting messages from former students.
I get that. It's the smell for me. The air smells a little different when you're supposed to be heading back to campus.
Isn't it true? It smells better, by the way. All the humidity is out of the air. It smells clearer.
And there's like a particular like texture in the air, I feel like, when you get that first like crisp morning.
Isn't it true? Yeah.
That's I feel that crisp morning and I can literally smell school and books.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, I have that experience every year, and it makes you realize how much our calendars, all of us here, how much our calendars are based on our academic experience, because New Year is September, you know, in many ways. I mean, ironically, it is in certain religious traditions too, like in Judaism and in Orthodox Christianity, September 1st is the new year of the liturgical calendar. And so this always strikes me, the fall is the time to begin things. So, Suri, how are you doing?
Oh, sorry I was late. I was in a work meeting.
Yes, I figured most of you were at some other thing during this. Suri was in Jerusalem with me when I had 3 trips in Jerusalem during my time at Dickinson. I think 98 and 99 and 2000. When did you go, Suri? What year was it? Do you remember?
2011?
11, I think that was it. We had others planned, but there were always intifadas that happened to intervene at just the most inappropriate time. But Suri was part of that last group, and that was a great group. That's another thing I want to do, Zach, to answer your question. If the pandemic ever passes and I'm still healthy enough, I want to do a lot more traveling. In fact, Laura can tell you I was supposed to be on a trip this past summer with alumni.
Yes.
There it is. So, and we had to cancel it, alas. So.
But Ted, I haven't reached out there. They've rescheduled it for 2022. So maybe we can do it in 2022.
Okay, we can talk about that. Let's hope I'm forward in 2022. Sometimes I think arthritis might win this battle.
So I don't want to monopolize, but Professor, I was curious, what's on your travel list? That was my follow-up.
Well, last year at this time, I finally got to go to Lebanon. As I was participating in an ecclesiastical synod there. I had to give a paper, and it was a sort of a time. Lebanon is the most beautiful country that I've ever seen. I mean, it makes you wonder why anyone would ever leave there. Of course, what forced most of the Lebanese Americans to become citizens of this country were the horrible economic situations there, which, by the way, are being repeated right now. The economy there has pretty much collapsed. But I fell in love with the place, and I was busy during that conference, but I want to go back and just spend some time wandering through the country, which is not very large. And, you know, the only bad thing about Lebanon, and you'll love this as an environmentalist, Zach, the country's beautiful, but you know what mars the beauty of the country is there is litter everywhere. I mean, you go through this beautiful countryside and you see those, you know, the bags you get from supermarkets, the plastic bags, Evian water bottles everywhere. It just mars the beauty of the place. And the government was in such disarray there, they couldn't even arrange to give people garbage bags to collect litter and get paid for it, you know. But so to answer your question, I want to go back to the Middle East. I'm going to go back to Lebanon. Syria is pretty much out of the, I've been to Egypt, but not for a long period of time. You know, my ecclesiastical jurisdiction is centered in Damascus, but they have the monastery in Lebanon, which is where I would be staying there. So this is, you know, I also want to go. I've never been to South America. So, you know, I studied Spanish for years when I was in high school. I revived it because I needed it for my doctoral dissertation, but I really want to go. In fact, one of the people who signed up for this, but for some reason is not here today, is from Argentina. And remember, Nikki, you probably remember at the time you were at Dickinson, we had a large number of students from Argentina. And she was one of those students. I'd like to go to Argentina for two reasons. Beautiful place. I want to go to South America. And my ethnic background is Italian. And there's a huge Italian population in Argentina. In fact, I have some relatives there that we get Christmas cards from every year. But the point is, Italian has infected Spanish in Argentina. They always say that if you speak Argentinian Spanish, it's half Italian.
So it's interesting that you say that, because I have a couple of friends here in Atlanta who are Argentinian, and I speak to them in Italian and they respond in Spanish, and we can understand each other perfectly well and have a whole conversation.
Yeah, it's amazing. First of all, the languages, when I
Professor, I'm from Argentina.
There you go. I was just
Anabella. I probably put myself as Ana because most people call me Ana nowadays, but when I was in college, Anabella. Yes. So yes. There I am. Yeah, so I'm from Argentina, and you're absolutely right. Even some words that we say are exactly the same. Like, for example, we don't say adios, we say ciao.
Ciao. There you go.
Spelled C-H-A-U, but it's from the Italian influence. And if you want to say a beer, we say birra, which is the word in Italian.
Yes.
And then we pronounce the S's, the hand gestures, because, you know, in the 1920s, 50% of the Argentina's population was either Italian or Spaniard. So most people's heritage, my ancestry is different because my family is actually from the Middle East, Syria, Egypt, and Lebanon.
Right.
But you know, as a Mizrahi Jew, but most people in Argentina would claim they have ancestors that are Italian or Spaniard. So it's pretty cool.
Well, I remember having that discussion with you, Annabelle. I remember it very well. And I also remember, I thought of you recently because I was watching a film that I think was done in Guatemala, I think. But the Spanish was odd. And I remember you're telling me that the Spanish I learned was Mexican Spanish, and there are grammatical differences in Argentinian Spanish, Italian influence aside, but there are certain conjugations and certain things that are done in Argentinian Spanish that's different. And I noticed that I was watching in this film, they don't use ustedes for you plural, they use os. And I said, this is a whole dialect that I don't know, but I thought of you immediately. And then I got the email about your new book coming out, the ABC, whatever it's called, Deria.
With my daughter, yes. Yes, we did a project with my daughter, and then I've also written actually a travel book with my husband in Spanish as a challenge for him as a non-native speaker. I was mostly the editor, and it's based on the last I would say 10 years of traveling. We got to live in the Netherlands for 3 years, and we got to visit a lot of countries. So it came like a project for the last 3 years, and I guess COVID gave us the excuse that, we had to, now that we didn't have all these other activities going on, even with 2 children, keeping us busy, we were able to put it together and publish it in the spring. So,
well, your English was always so good when you were here, but now you speak like a Native American. How did that happen?
Well, I've been here for 15 years. And when I think about it, if you don't count the first years of my life, it's almost half my life now. I mean, it's pretty much I'm 34. So,
So where are you living now? Where are you now?
I'm in Philly.
Oh, you are? Okay, you're Pennsylvania.
Yeah, so not far at all.
Right.
After college, I moved to Madison, Wisconsin, where my then boyfriend was, who's like a Dickinson graduate. And then we were engaged. We got married in 2008, the year I graduated. No, 2009, after I graduated. Lived in Wisconsin for 6 years. became a teacher. I worked a lot with immigrants and refugees, primarily Spanish speaking, but actually from all over the world.
Right.
And then we moved to the Netherlands, and then became a mom. I continue teaching. I do teaching mostly online language.
Right.
And then we've been in Philly for 4 years, and I had my sons, and I have a daughter who's 5.5 and a son who is almost 3.
Brava, brava. Busy life. Zach,
Yeah.
this is a long answer to your question, Zach. I want to go to Argentina, and look, an Argentinian suddenly appeared before us.
Yes.
There you go.
Yes.
Where I want to go to. Of course, I want to go back to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is always, so you can understand this. This is like a second home to me now. And I understand that they closed so much of the old city down during the pandemic. In fact, the Holy Sepulchre was closed for the first time since like the 14th century, if you can believe it. So this has been a really big thing. I want to go back there. I also, here's another thing I want to do. This is in the bucket list, Zach. My relatives from Italy came from central Italy, the mountains east of Rome, the Abruzzi. And I want to go back there and just, take a bus and just travel through the area. And my father's family is from a little town called Roseto. And believe it or not, at Dickinson, this is a good Dickinson story, I had a student who was a non-traditional student, not 18 to 22, a little older, but she lived in Roseto. And she was Ukrainian American or Ukrainian Canadian background. Her husband was Italian. That's where they lived. So when I go to visit, I actually have a place to stay there. So that's another thing I want to do. So there are all these things that I would love to do. We're going to have to see whether the pandemic and health permits me to do it. Right now, I'm pretty healthy. Doctor says I'm condemned to live a few more years. But traveling is a pretty exhausting thing to do. And yeah, Nikki.
I was going to say, on the vein of travel, so I have been patiently waiting. When I graduated in 2011, I could no way afford to go on Dickinson's alumni trip to Israel. So I've been patiently waiting for it to happen again, and it hasn't. So would you ever consider putting together an itinerary
like our program was for students, only for alumni.
Right, but whether they do the actual program or you just put the itinerary together for interested parties to go on their own as health and world politics permit.
Yeah, Laura, this is
writing it down.
Maybe. And Suri can tell you. I mean, I think. What do you think, Suri? If we had people go and follow basically the itinerary that we followed those 5-6 weeks we were there, I think it would work.
I think so. There was a lot of variety, and it was really well laid out in terms of like what you saw when. So
right.
I would go back and do the exact same thing again.
And so would I. That's why I'm saying, Laura, take note, because it would be great to be able to do it again. So
yeah.
Well, if it happens,
I've written it down.
Excellent.
You'll be in touch if it happens. So, but on any other, yes, sir, Eric.
There we go. A few moments ago, you said you had roughly 50 people in I don't know if it's in a major or in a class, not all that long ago. I don't think that's the situation today.
Absolutely not. You're right.
I'm thrilled that my son has declared a philosophy major, but I don't think that's the herd. And so I was wondering if that just depresses you, or is that just a challenge to get people into the classes? What's to be done with all these business and economics majors that are?
I know. You hit the nail on the head there. And it's not just the nail on the head, it's the nerve. I mean, those of us in humanities really are pretty distraught about exactly the trend that you just articulated there. I think it really is an impoverishment of liberal arts education when things like philosophy and religion end up getting so de-emphasized. But I'm a pragmatist at base, and here's what my attitude is, and this is what I argue all the time, that if you're going to be a good business person in an international business, if you're going to be someone who's in politics and is going to do well there. You have to have the kind of background, the cultural context for doing that. And that means that this stuff is not just interesting in a detached way, but it's interesting in an applied way. It's necessary. I don't see a change happening. Listen, we had 50 religion majors at one point. As I said, most of them were double majors, but they were interested in the stuff. We had a departmental coherence, which gave them a sense of, I really have a background in this area now. And I think the department needs to sort of repackage itself in a number of ways. But you're right that this is part of a larger move away from humanities that I think is disconcerting. I'm not sure what the answer to it is. And do I find it depressing at some level? Yeah, I do. I really do.
I just wanted to jump in and say,
Tim, how are you?
I graduated as a religion major in 2002, and I now work in international business. I have absolutely no educational background in it, but I've found that my liberal arts education has served me tremendously in that field. It really has.
And doing international business and knowing the cultures of the people you're dealing with. And of course, you know, this is news to a lot of Americans, but in most of the world, religion is a big component of culture in the rest of the world. I mean, we see it as an unnecessary embellishment on people's lives. In 80% of the world, the statistics show that people consider that central to their culture and identity. So where are you now, Tim? Where are you living?
I live in Maple Shade, New Jersey, just on the other side of Philadelphia.
Yeah. Great.
I have a question from Brad. He's a 1975 grad and religion major. He's a What are current religion major graduates doing nowadays?
Well, they're doing everything. When people ask us, what does it prepare you for? I mean, Tim, I'm just glad that Tim just said what he said. They end up in all kinds of fields, and they find out that what they learned in an arts context in general, and in a religion context in particular, they feel very much at home in dealing with people from a different worldview. And it gives them, you know, we make this distinction in the academic study of religion between emic and etic. Etic means from the outside. And so as an academic who studies religion, you always want to maintain an objectivity, a distance. You don't become an advocate for this tradition or that, but you try to understand it from the outside. And emic means you try to identify with it as much as possible. All right. So this balance between the emic and the etic, which is a linguistic distinction, we try to maintain in the study of religion in an academic context. And that, think about it. Who was it? I think it was John Kerry. Yeah, John Kerry, who was what was his, he was Secretary of State, wasn't he, at one point? Nikki, is that right?
Yes, he was.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
And they asked,
He was.
if you had to go back to college, what would you major in? And he said, I would major in comparative literature and religion. He said, that's what would have prepared me for doing what I have been doing in my professional political life in public service. And I think that that's really interesting. And Tim, you just corroborated that. I mean, not to have that kind of broader cultural background, I think it really impoverishes your preparation for doing whatever you're going to do. So Brad, what are religion majors doing? They're doing everything. A small number of them go on to do further work in the scholarly fields, in textual studies and biblical studies. One of our graduates is applying to a program in Assyriology of all things because of the course he took in Old Testament where he was introduced to an ancient Assyrian text, and this is blossoming into an academic career. People go to seminary, but a minority of them. Most people take what they learned in the religion classes and they use it in another field. I always taught the course in sort of alternation with Professor Commons in the history department, the Islam course. And that course always filled. It was an enormous course. And people in it were all in it for particular reasons that had to do with what they intended to do with their career. Very few of those people were going to become academic students of religion, scholars of religion, but they felt they had to know about this world religious tradition for political life, for international relations, for international business, all of that stuff. So what are they doing, Brad? They're doing everything. And I think they sort of, and here's the funny thing is, and this is, Eric, this sort of allays my depression a little bit with the question you ask. They take the course because they think it will be relevant to what they really want to do professionally. And then they arrive at the magic moment where they say, wow, this is interesting stuff. I got to get more of this. So our number of majors, Eric, has went down in the department, but our number of minors soared. Why? Because in the past, people can do double majors, but so many other majors like psychology and history and various other international business, they added more to their requirements for their major. So it was difficult to take two majors, but the students had their interest piqued, so they become minors. And so we have a large number of minors, or at least when I left 2 years ago, we had a large number of minors. So the interest is there, but sometimes people have to dive into the pool to decide they like the feel of the water. And
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I have one more question from Brad, but Annabella chimed in on chat. She said her majors were archaeology and anthropology, and she worked with refugees all over the world. Understanding their system of beliefs as part of their culture was essential.
Yep.
And she said she took Dead Sea Scrolls and Islam with you.
There you go. The two courses I mentioned. Dead Sea Scrolls. What can I tell you?
And another question from Brad. Do you have any reminiscences of former faculty Slotin, Booth, and Bechtel?
Oh, absolutely. Ralph Slotin, I was there when he was retired. In fact, as I arrived at Dickinson was when he had first entered into retirement. And he was always there as the godfather of the department. And he was always very encouraging to me. And I remember, Professor Slotin, Ralph Slotin, was a real mystic at heart, And I remember when I was interviewing for my position at Dickinson, he says, oh, I'm so glad you're from an Eastern Orthodox background because I have great interest in mystical religion, and the mystical emphasis in Orthodoxy always interested me. And I said sort of glibly, I said, yeah, but I don't have a mystical bone in my body, is what I said, because I was an historian and a textual, and I thought there went my chance for ever getting hired at Dickinson, because Ralph Slotin said, this guy I thought he was going to be a mystic, and he isn't. But we hit it off really well. And from that point on, he was always a mentor to me. Dan Bechtel was the person that I replaced. His position was the position I went into because he taught the biblical courses and so forth. So he was always there. And also Harry Booth would drop by to visit all the time. So the answer to your question is, Brad, yes, they were always there as sort of patrons and protectors of this generation, my generation, which was the one to follow them. And now there's a generation following my generation who's taking the position. So I try to keep in mind what that generation of scholars did for us, and I'm going to try to do that for the next shift that's come in. And to some extent, that is happening already. So.
Oh, nice. Danielle Goonan.
Hi, Danielle.
Hi, good morning. So nice to be with you.
Likewise, good to see you again.
Good to see you. Yeah, I was just going to say, I actually work on economic policy issues in the U.S. And I was an American Studies major, but my focus was on religion in the U.S. And so when I joined the Rockefeller Foundation, one of the portfolios I created were religious voices that were pushing for economic policies that benefit working people. And it's been fascinating to work with, Latino evangelicals who will, in some ways say, we don't belong to the Republicans, we don't belong to the Democrats, we belong to whatever party aligns with our values, right? And including economic policies for working people as those values, or the Jewish Federation, or Nuns on the Bus. So it's been really interesting to be able to build that and to watch how I used what I learned at Dickinson in your class and in Staub's class and in so many other classes.
This is so good to hear. I mean, listen, just even the way you're talking about it, you have such a sense of the feel of the influence of religion in various subcultures, very active in so many other ways in our culture. And this is the advantage of, having the kind of background that you have.
Exactly.
So, which course, I forget which course you took with me. Did you take Islam course? There it is. And I remember where you sat in Denny. I remember I'm sitting there, and there you were, almost right straight in front of me.
Yeah, no, I wrote my paper on the Nation of Islam. And so like everything we've gone through this summer with the Black Lives Matter uprisings and all of the issues that, are still unfortunately at front and center in this country, just thinking back to everything I learned at Dickinson and how relevant it is. How much has changed, but how much has not changed.
But no matter how much it changes, you're attuned to the dynamics of change.
Exactly.
That's the key. That means you're never going to be unqualified for your job, because you're going to be able to, track the changes as they happen. And this is great. So where are you living now?
So I'm back in New York. I was in Arkansas for a few years. After graduating Dickinson, I went to Italy on a Fulbright. I did my master's in London, and I was in DC for a little while. So, but back home in New York. And it's COVID central here. I actually got tested this morning. So yeah, everyone come visit New York, but wait a few months.
But you're better off than where we are in a lot of places.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry?
No, Nikki had something. Did you? Oh, okay.
It's fine.
Go ahead.
I was just asking Danielle where she did her master's in London.
London School of Economics.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
I did the international relations course there.
So did I.
I was probably a few years behind you.
2010.
I was 2012.
Awesome.
Very good. See, the Dickinson web spreads far and wide.
I did
so
my
funny.
master's in London too.
I'm sorry?
I did my master's in London at City University London.
Oh, great. Yeah.
It's so funny how we talk about using our experiences in your classes, Professor Pulcini.
Is this Colleen?
It is Colleen.
All right. Colleen Hagarty, right?
Yes.
See, I told you I don't forget faces.
I know.
You took either Old Testament or New Testament.
I took Old Testament and History of Christianity.
Okay.
And then Sarah Borland picked everything else up after me, and I went into Judaic studies.
Yeah,
but I got into an argument with a family friend the other day, and used my knowledge from History of Christianity to be like, no, that's not how the Bible works. Let me tell you what the history is and the context is behind why you believe what you believe. Didn't change his mind, but we still have those. I still have that knowledge. The notebooks from your classes were some of the last notebooks that I got rid of from my undergrad classes, because the way that you taught, I took copious amounts of notes.
Right.
And when my sister took Old Testament in context, Megan Hagarty, she actually used my notes as well. So they got passed down.
This is great.
So she didn't use your papers as well.
So she did not. She wrote her own papers, but I thought it would be good for her to have the context of the notes, because she ended up taking her own notes too.
Right.
But at the very least, she could look and be like, oh, Colleen saw this in this conversation and I missed it in this one. And so
yeah, the structure of the course was pretty much the same, even though the detail, every time you teach a course, it's different from what you've done before, but the basic structure is already there. And it is interesting to see, even in my notes, what I used in teaching the course, what I emphasized one year was not what I emphasized the next. And I would ask myself, why did I do it that way in that year? Maybe I should do it again that year. When you took the Old Testament course, did one of the papers, this is one of the things I'm proudest of in teaching in Dickinson, the legal books in the Old Testament, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and the laws, the covenant code in Exodus. How do you teach these laws? It just seems like, a bunch of laws that are totally irrelevant to modern life. And I don't know whether, maybe this was after you took the course from me, Colleen, but what I did was I gave theoretical case studies where Moses and Aaron had to solve a case that came before them. and they had to use the laws that were in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy to do it. And it worked to get people to read the laws, because half of the students in my classes were lawyers to be anyway. They would read these laws and say, how would I apply these in solving this case? And it was such a big hit. I would wander by students and they would be arguing, well, this law in Leviticus says this, but no, this in Deuteronomy says this. I said, my goodness, it's like the laws had come alive for them, you know? So,
yeah, I must have missed that. That was not part of my Old Testament in context, but that
No.
sounds like it would have been really fun.
It was, but it illustrates my point that even as I taught that course year after year, I came to new ways of doing it, you know, and that was one of the better ones, I think. So, but, you know, I do miss the interaction with students. People say, do you miss teaching? I'm not sure I would miss it in the present context, but I do miss the interaction with students that I had in the classroom. There's something about the chemistry of the classroom that I miss a lot, you know. And I remember when I first got to Dickinson for new faculty, there was a panel, and I remember one of the faculty members said, let the students know that you care about them. And if you do, they'll respond 100 times, you know, in response. I found that to be the case. And I never expect students to work harder in a class than I worked in the class. So I figure if students saw me working in the class as the instructor, hopefully that would inspire them as students to work hard in the class too. And if you have students and instructors working hard in the class together, it usually ends up being a pretty positive experience. So.
Yeah, I'm struck that this feels very similar to your classes, Professor, that I feel guilty for not taking as many notes. I noticed that you're talking most of the time, but we're still all engaged in it. It's feeling very cool that it's very similar to your
Well,
class.
yeah, there'll be a quiz when I talk to you on Friday, Matt, so be ready to.
Yeah, that's the fear that's creeping in. I just feel it.
A little bit of fear goes a long way, you know. You know that as a counselor, right?
That's right.
What year did you graduate, Matt? That's a thing I don't. What year?
13.
13. I'll never forget my students, and this is sort of scary for an historian, but I forget what year you graduated, like what order was. You're all in this eternal now in my mind, and so I don't know who came before, who came after. So and then when you have Colleen, like people like you have siblings, like Megan, I know is post Colleen, but I don't remember exactly what years things happened. So yeah, it's
2004 and 2008.
Okay, there you go. This Dickinson was a great experience, and the biggest joy of the whole experience was in the students, no doubt about it. And I think that's the element that makes for a happy life, is if you get a job or you work in a job that you feel privileged to be working in, not just something you do to support yourself, but feel privileged to do. And that's what I felt. I can honestly say that, when you love what you do, it's not so much of a hassle to do it. So.
Any other questions? If not, that was a beautiful way to end, that, how much you just cared about the students and loved your job. And that's something I wish for all of us.
Well, yeah, so do I. And for all of you guys, I mean, Laura, you said you're going to give them my email address and that sort of thing. Feel free to be in touch, because I like to hear from students, usually in August and early September, but then you can, whenever you want to just drop me a line to know how things are going. I always enjoy hearing about it. And it's amazing how much you're going to find it amazing how fast time goes by. And so when I was at Dickinson for 24 years, I couldn't believe that 24 years had passed. So as I continue my archaeological excavation through my files, through the class rosters and all of these things, I'll still be thinking of most of you, because you'll come up again and again in the excavation. And this is going to be, I don't know whether Annabella is still there, but she can testify to the fact that when you're an archaeologist, you find things sometimes that are really surprising. And that's the payoff. That's the payoff.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I just wanted to comment and see if maybe you find it there in your archive somewhere. At the time I was taking Dead Sea Scrolls, you may recall I took a GIS class, and I used my project for my ArcGIS, which was I was doing digital maps, was to map all the caves and other archaeological sites and findings that were related to the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I created this like virtual map of all the sites, and I think I gave you a printout.
We
so
did, and I remember it, and I kept it.
So it
And
might be somewhere in your office.
Brad, if you're still online, here's a good thing of what our religious students do. You know, she took that course, Dead Sea Scrolls, and used it in a GIS course. I mean, this is a good cross fertilization there. So
Great.
Liberal arts in action.
yes, liberal arts in action.
Well, are there any other questions?
Eric, is your son a freshman? A first year?
He's a sophomore who just declared a philosophy major.
Oh, good.
And he's been very fortunate to have really, really outstanding professors and classes. Is other than present company, is there one who you'd say, I'm sure there are a lot, but one who you'd say, just whatever you do, I don't care what they're teaching, don't miss this gentleman.
I'd say the faculty are all very strong, to
Yeah.
be honest with you. The person who's taking my place is Peter Shadler, so he teaches the textual courses. I don't know what your son's interests are they contemporary or historical? We have very good contemporary people too, who are teaching religion and modern culture. So just tell them to keep an eye on the course offerings, which of course vary semester by semester. And when he sees something that piques his interest, tell him to dive into the pool, and he might like swimming around a little bit more. He could be a history major and a religion minor, maybe. You never know.
Very good.
Again, thanks a lot for organizing this. This has been great.
Absolutely. I hope everyone had as much fun this morning as I did. It was just so nice to have a feel-good Zoom instead of a heavy news.
Yes.
If anyone does have any additional questions or wants to follow up with Ted in any way, his email is still a Dickinson email, just pulcini@dickinson.edu. So PULCINI@dickinson.edu. So Ted, thank you very much to our participants. Thank you again for joining us. I hope to see you at a future virtual event and hopefully in person again soon. If there are other retired faculty members or administrators that you'd love to have a conversation with, please email alumni@dickinson.edu. I will get that and we will schedule some more of these. So thank you, everybody. And Ted.
Sounds good. Be well, Professor.
Stay safe all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, you too.